You're too much of a perfectionist for construction, Clint said, tossing the concrete specs on my desk like they were yesterday's newspaper. My name's Raymond Booker. I'm 48, been pouring foundations in Fort Worth for 23 years. Started as a laborer fresh out of high school, worked my way up to foreman at Nordall Construction. I've built hospitals, apartment complexes, and more schools than I can count. Never had a single structure fail inspection. Never had a kid get hurt because I cut corners. The specs Clint dropped showed a concrete mix that didn't match our original bid. The PSI rating was 30% lower than what we promised the school district. Lower than what the blueprints called for. Lower than what those kids deserved. This supplier's cheaper, Clint continued, leaning against the trailer wall. We save 50 grand on materials alone. Corporate loves efficiency. I picked up the papers and read them again. The new concrete wouldn't hold up to the load requirements for a 2-story elementary school. Not safely. Maybe it would last 5 years before stress fractures appeared. Maybe 10 if they got lucky. This doesn't meet code, I said, keeping my voice level. Clint's eyes narrowed. Ray, we've been through this before. You worry too much about every little detail. Real builders know how to maximize profits while getting the job done. I set the specs down and looked at him. Clint had been my supervisor for 3 years. Before that, he worked sales at corporate headquarters in Dallas. Never poured concrete in his life. Never had to explain to a parent why their child's school collapsed. This isn't a little detail, I said. This is a foundation for a school. It's a foundation that needs to be cost-effective, he shot back. The school district doesn't need to know every technical specification. They just need a building that looks good and passes basic inspection. Something cold settled in my stomach. I'd suspected this conversation was coming. For months, Clint had been pushing cheaper materials, faster timelines, and what he called creative solutions. The other foremen went along with it. They had mortgages and families to think about. So did I, but I also had something else. A conscience. I need to review this with the engineering team, I said, stalling for time. Clint straightened up. There's nothing to review. Corporate already approved it. We start pouring Monday morning. That's final. After he left, I sat in my truck for 20 minutes, staring at those specs. I thought about the kids who would walk those hallways. Thought about my own daughter, Isabella, who attended a school I'd helped build 8 years ago. Thought about how I'd sleep at night knowing I poured a foundation designed to fail. That's when I made my first call. I started working construction because my dad, Vincent, did. He taught me that a man's work speaks for itself long after he's gone. Vincent built half the commercial district in downtown Fort Worth during the 80s. Solid work, still standing strong. Measure twice, cut once, he used to say, and never let anyone pressure you into doing something you can't put your name on. He died of a heart attack when I was 32. By then, I'd already been promoted to crew leader. I promised myself I'd build structures the way he would have. No shortcuts, no regrets. My wife, Patricia, understood the pressure I was under. We'd been married 19 years, and she knew I brought work stress home sometimes, but she also knew I couldn't compromise on safety. You do what you think is right, she told me that Friday night as I explained the concrete situation. We'll figure out the rest. Isabella, our 16-year-old, was doing homework at the kitchen table. She looked up when I mentioned the elementary school project. That's where my friend Katie's little brother goes, she said. Isn't that the new school on Maple Street? My chest tightened. I'd driven past that site every day for 2 months watching the foundation prep work, thinking about all the children who would depend on what we built there. The warning signs with Clint had been building for months. It started small, switching to a cheaper grade of rebar on a strip mall project, using less waterproofing on a warehouse foundation. Each time I raised concerns, each time Clint dismissed them. You're not seeing the big picture, Ray, he'd say. Construction is about meeting deadlines and budgets. Everything else is just paperwork. But the paperwork mattered. Building codes existed for reasons written in blood and tragedy. I'd studied every major structural failure in my career. The Hyatt Regency walkway collapse in Kansas City. The Florida International University bridge failure. They all started the same way. Someone decided that good enough was actually good enough. 3 weeks earlier, I'd overheard Clint on a phone call with corporate. He was bragging about cost savings on recent projects, talking about managing inspector relationships, using phrases like regulatory flexibility and value engineering. I'd seen the financial reports too. Nordall Construction was struggling. 2 major contracts had fallen through the previous year. The company was bidding aggressively on every project, often below what the work actually cost. They were making up the difference by cutting material quality and pressuring crews to work faster. I understood the business pressure. What I couldn't understand was using children's safety as the solution. That weekend, I drove to the job site after hours, stood where the foundation would be poured, imagined classrooms full of kids above that concrete, kids laughing, learning, growing up. They deserved better than Clint's cost-saving measures. They deserved the foundation I'd originally promised to build. Monday morning arrived with the kind of Texas heat that makes concrete cure too fast if you're not careful. I showed up early, hoping to have another conversation with Clint. Maybe find a compromise that would satisfy corporate while meeting safety standards. Instead, I found the concrete trucks already lined up outside the site. The drivers were checking their manifests, preparing to pour the substandard mix Clint had ordered. I recognized the lead driver, Tommy, who'd delivered quality concrete to my sites for 12 years. "Morning, Ray," Tommy called out. "Got a change in specs here. This mix seems lighter than usual." I walked over and checked his delivery ticket. The concrete strength was exactly what Clint had ordered, 30% below the original specification, perfectly legal for a warehouse slab or parking lot, completely inadequate for a school foundation. "Tommy," I said quietly, "hold off on the pour until I clear something with the office." He nodded, sensing something was wrong. I found Clint in the construction trailer reviewing schedules with 2 junior supervisors. When he saw me, his expression hardened. "Ray, I hope you're not here to restart yesterday's conversation." "I am," I said. "This concrete won't hold the load. When the building settles, we'll have foundation cracks within 5 years, maybe sooner." The junior supervisors looked uncomfortable. One of them, Kevin, had worked under me for 6 years. He knew my reputation for quality work. Clint stood up. "Ray, I'm going to say this one more time. Corporate has approved these specifications. The concrete meets minimum building code requirements. We are not spending an extra $50,000 to make you feel better about engineering margins." "It's not about margins," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It's about doing the job right." "The job," Clint said, his voice rising, "is to build this school on time and on budget, period. If you can't handle that level of responsibility, maybe you need to find another line of work." The trailer went quiet. Kevin and the other supervisors stared at their paperwork, pretending not to listen. I looked at Clint for a long moment. Thought about my 23 years with this company, thought about the reputation I'd built, thought about all the structures that still stood because I'd insisted on doing things right. Then I thought about those kids. "I won't pour substandard concrete under a school," I said. "Find someone else." Clint's face flushed red. "You're fired. Pack your tools and get off my site." I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice, just nodded and walked out of the trailer. As I loaded my toolbox into my truck, I saw Kevin watching from the window. He looked like he wanted to say something but stayed put. I drove away from that job site knowing I'd made the right choice. What Clint didn't know was that I'd already made 3 phone calls over the weekend. The real work was just beginning. That afternoon, I called Patricia from my truck outside a coffee shop on University Drive. "How did it go?" she asked. "I'm unemployed," I said. Silence on the other end. Then, "Good. You couldn't live with yourself if you'd backed down." She was right. But being right doesn't pay the mortgage. I spent the rest of the week making calls to other construction companies in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. My reputation opened doors, but the conversations all ended the same way. Everyone knew I'd been fired from Nordall. In construction, word travels fast. "Ray, you're a solid foreman," said Jacob Hayes, owner of Hayes & Associates Construction. "But I can't afford to hire someone who won't follow orders from management." This is a business, not a safety seminar. Another company manager was more direct. Look, we all know Clint Dorsey. He's got friends at the licensing board. Nobody wants trouble with Nordahl Construction. Maybe try looking outside Texas. By Friday, I realized I was being blacklisted. Clint had made calls, spread the word that I was difficult to manage and inflexible about cost controls. In a tight industry where everyone knew everyone, that was a career death sentence. But I had something Clint didn't expect: documentation. Over the weekend, I compiled everything I'd gathered during the 3 weeks before my firing. Emails showing the concrete specification changes, purchase orders revealing the cost-cutting measures, photos of the original blueprints compared to the modified plans, text messages between Clint and the concrete supplier discussing flexibility and mix requirements. I also had something else: video footage. The previous month, I'd started recording safety meetings and material deliveries with my phone. Standard practice for protecting yourself against liability claims. What I'd captured was Clint explicitly instructing crews to work around certain building code requirements and discussing how to manage inspector visits. Monday morning, I drove to the Fort Worth Building Inspection Office on East Belknap Street. The chief inspector, Beverly Walsh, had worked with me on dozens of projects over the years. She knew my reputation for thorough, compliant work. "Ray," she said, looking surprised when I walked into her office, "I heard about the situation at Nordahl. I'm sorry." "Beverly, I need to file a formal structural deviation report," I said, setting a thick folder on her desk. Her expression grew serious. "What kind of deviation?" I opened the folder and showed her the concrete specifications, explained the load calculations, walked her through the emails and purchase orders. Beverly studied the documents for 20 minutes, occasionally asking technical questions. Her frown deepened as she reviewed the evidence. "Ray, this is substantial," she said finally. "If what you're showing me is accurate, this represents a significant safety violation." "It's accurate," I said. "Every document is dated and verified." She leaned back in her chair. "You understand that filing this report will trigger a formal investigation? We'll have to shut down the project pending review." "I understand." "You also understand that Nordahl Construction will know you filed the complaint?" I nodded. "I'm prepared for that." Beverly picked up her phone. "I'm calling the site inspector right now. We'll have someone there within the hour." As I left the building inspection office, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Stay out of business that doesn't concern you anymore. Some bridges can't be rebuilt. CD." Clint was playing hardball, but he'd made one critical mistake. He thought I was fighting for my job. I wasn't fighting for my job. I was fighting for those kids' lives, and I'd already taken steps he couldn't undo. That evening, I received a call from Patricia. Her voice was tight with worry. "Ray, Isabella came home from school today asking questions. Some of her friends' parents work in construction. They're saying you're causing problems for hard-working people, that you're trying to shut down a school project." The smear campaign had started. Clint wasn't just trying to blacklist me professionally. He was going after my family's reputation in the community. I sat in my truck outside our house looking at the windows where my wife and daughter were probably discussing whether their husband and father was doing the right thing. For the first time since this whole situation started, I wondered if I'd made a mistake. Then I remembered those concrete specs. And I knew I hadn't. The building inspector arrived at the Nordahl construction site Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. sharp. I wasn't there to see it, but Kevin called me an hour later. "Ray, you need to know what happened," he said, his voice shaky. The inspector showed up with a stack of papers and shut everything down. Clint went ballistic, started yelling about former employees causing trouble. The inspector told him to call his lawyer. "What about the concrete?" I asked. "They took samples from the trucks that were already on site, sent them to a lab for testing. Also took core samples from the warehouse foundation we poured last month using the same supplier." That warehouse foundation. I'd raised concerns about that project too, but Clint had overruled me. If those core samples showed structural deficiencies, it would prove this wasn't an isolated incident. Kevin, what aren't you telling me? Long pause. Ray, there's something else. The inspector asked questions about other recent projects. She had a list of sites where we used the same concrete supplier. This isn't just about the school anymore. My stomach dropped. If Beverly Walsh was investigating multiple sites, it meant she'd found a pattern of systematic code violations. This was bigger than one substandard foundation. Did she mention any specific projects? The Riverside Medical Center parking structure, the Northside Elementary addition from last year, the Morrison Community Center. Ray, we've been using that cheap concrete supplier on a lot of jobs. I thought about all those structures, all those people depending on foundations that might not hold up under stress. The medical center parking structure alone served thousands of patients and families every year. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from someone I hadn't spoken to in 2 years, Marcus Thompson, a structural engineer who'd worked on several of my projects before moving to a consulting firm in Austin. Ray, I heard about the situation in Fort Worth, Marcus said. I've been doing some research on concrete failures in North Texas. Your timing might be perfect. What do you mean? 3 weeks ago, I was hired by an insurance company to investigate foundation problems at a commercial building in Arlington. Guess who the contractor was? Nordahl Construction. Bingo. And guess which concrete supplier they used? The same one Clint had been pushing for the school project. Marcus continued. The building owners are filing a lawsuit. Foundation cracks appeared 18 months after construction. The concrete's actual strength is about 60% of what's listed on the delivery tickets. 60%? Ray, I think your former company has been systematically using substandard materials and falsifying documentation. This could be criminal fraud, not just code violations. That evening, I drove to the school construction site. The gates were locked, yellow caution tape wrapped around the perimeter. A large sign posted by the city read, "Construction halted pending safety investigation." I sat in my truck across the street watching the empty lot where those children's classrooms should have been rising. My phone rang. Patricia. Ray, you need to come home. There's a man here who says he's a reporter from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. He's asking questions about the school project. The story was going public. When I got home, the reporter was sitting at our kitchen table with Patricia and Isabella. He was young, maybe late 20s, with the kind of eager expression that suggested he smelled a big story. "Mr. Booker," he said, standing up to shake my hand. "I'm David Roy from the Star-Telegram. I understand you filed the complaint that shut down the Maple Street Elementary construction project." "I filed a safety report with the building inspection office," I said carefully. "Sources tell me this involves allegations of widespread use of substandard building materials. Can you comment on that?" I looked at Patricia, then at Isabella. My daughter was watching me with a mixture of pride and worry. "Those kids deserve a safe school," I said finally. "That's all I'm trying to ensure." The reporter smiled. "Mr. Booker, I think you're going to want to hear what else I've discovered about Nordahl Construction." David Roy opened his laptop on our kitchen table and pulled up a spreadsheet with dozens of entries. "I've been investigating construction irregularities in North Texas for 6 months," he said. "Your complaint gave me the missing piece I needed." The spreadsheet showed a pattern of projects where Nordahl Construction had received complaints about foundation problems, structural issues, or premature deterioration. 23 buildings over the past 4 years, all using the same concrete supplier that Clint had tried to force on the school project. "The Morrison Community Center developed foundation cracks after 8 months," Roy continued. "The Riverside Medical Center parking structure has water infiltration problems that shouldn't exist with proper concrete. 3 apartment complexes have structural issues that their builders attributed to normal settling." Isabella leaned forward, studying the screen. "Dad, how many people could get hurt if these buildings have problems?" "Thousands," I said quietly. Roy nodded. "That's why this story matters. But I need more than allegations. I need proof of systematic fraud." "What kind of proof?" "Internal communications, financial records, testimony from workers who witnessed the material substitutions." I thought about Kevin and the other crew members who'd seen what was happening but kept quiet to protect their jobs. Good men with families afraid to speak up against a system that punished honesty. I might be able to help with that, I said. The next morning, I made a series of carefully planned phone calls. First, I called Kevin, asked him to meet me for coffee off-site. When he arrived at the diner on Berry Street, he looked exhausted. "Ray, they've got us working 16-hour days trying to get back on schedule," he said. "Clint's furious about the investigation. He's blaming everything on you. Kevin, how many guys on the crew have documentation about the material changes, texts, emails, photos?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Most of us. We document everything to cover ourselves if something goes wrong. But Ray, if we turn that stuff over, we'll all get fired. If you don't turn it over, people could get hurt. Maybe killed." Kevin stared into his coffee for a long moment. "What are you asking me to do?" "I'm asking you to do the right thing, like I did." That afternoon, Kevin called me back. "There are 6 guys willing to provide documentation, but we need guarantees, protection from retaliation." I connected him with David Roy, who connected him with an attorney specializing in whistleblower protection. Meanwhile, I received another unexpected call. "Mr. Booker, this is attorney James Morrison from Morrison, Blake & Associates. I represent several property owners who've experienced structural problems with buildings constructed by Nordahl Construction. I'd like to discuss your expert testimony in upcoming litigation." Expert testimony. My 23 years of experience suddenly had legal value. "How many cases are we talking about?" I asked. "Potentially dozens. Your documentation could be crucial in establishing a pattern of negligent construction practices." That weekend, I received the best news yet. Beverly Walsh called with the concrete test results. "Ray, the samples from the school site tested at 42% below specified strength. The core samples from the warehouse foundation are even worse. We're talking about structural integrity failure within 2 to 3 years under normal load conditions." "What happens now?" "Full investigation. Criminal referral to the district attorney's office." "And Ray?" "The school district wants to meet with you about taking over the project with a new contractor." Patricia was in the kitchen making dinner when I hung up. Isabella was doing homework at the table where David Roy had first shown us the scope of Nordahl's problems. "Dad," Isabella said, looking up from her math textbook, "my friend Katie asked me something today. She said her parents want to know if our house is safe, since you built part of their neighborhood." I smiled. "Tell Katie's parents that her house was built before Clint Dorsey started cutting corners. It'll stand for 100 years. Isabella grinned. "So, we're the good guys in this story?" "We're the guys who tell the truth," I said. "Sometimes that's the same thing." The Fort Worth Star-Telegram ran David Roy's investigation as a front-page series titled, "Foundation of Lies: How One Construction Company Put Profits Before Safety." The first article hit newsstands on a Thursday morning in November. By noon, the Texas Attorney General's office had announced a criminal investigation into Nordahl Construction for fraud and endangering public safety. By 3 p.m., the company's stock had dropped 37%. By 5 p.m., Clint Dorsey was being escorted out of his office by federal agents carrying boxes of evidence. I was sitting in Morrison, Blake & Associates conference room when my phone buzzed with the news alert. Attorney James Morrison looked up from the witness preparation documents we'd been reviewing. "How does it feel to see justice in action?" he asked. "Like those kids can finally get the school they deserve," I said. The criminal charges were extensive. Wire fraud for falsifying concrete specifications, conspiracy to commit fraud for the systematic material substitutions, endangering public welfare for knowingly compromising structural integrity. But the civil litigation was where the real accountability happened. 28 property owners filed lawsuits seeking damages for structural defects. The insurance companies that had covered Nordahl's projects joined the suits, seeking reimbursement for fraudulent claims. Kevin and 5 other crew members provided testimony and documentation that sealed the case. The evidence was overwhelming. Hundreds of text messages discussing creative material substitutions, emails detailing cost-saving schemes, and financial records showing kickbacks from the Substandard concrete supplier. 3 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom and watched Clint Dorsey receive a sentence of 4 years in prison and full restitution to affected property owners. The judge's words stayed with me. "Mr. Dorsey, your actions endangered the lives of thousands of people, including children. Construction professionals hold a sacred trust to build structures that protect the people who use them. You violated that trust for profit." After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse into bright February sunshine. David Roy was waiting on the steps with his camera crew. "Mr. Booker, any comment on today's outcome?" I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The choice between keeping my job and keeping my conscience. The months of legal battles and death threats from Clint's supporters. The nights Patricia and I had stayed awake wondering if we'd done the right thing. "Those kids are going to have a safe school," I said. "That's all that matters." Spring came early to Fort Worth that year. I stood on the newly poured foundation of Maple Street Elementary, checking the concrete strength reports one final time. Perfect specifications, premium materials, everything those children deserved. The school district had hired Brennan and Associates Construction to complete the project, and they'd asked me to serve as senior foreman. It was the kind of offer that restored faith in the industry. "Ray, the principal wants to do a walkthrough," called out my new project manager, Lisa Hendricks. She was the kind of construction professional who understood that safety and quality weren't optional. As we toured the building site, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. Losing my job had led to finding my purpose. Standing up for what was right had created opportunities I never could have imagined. Patricia and Isabella visited the site that afternoon. Isabella brought her camera to document the construction process for a school project about local heroes. "Dad, Katie's little brother is going to attend this school when it opens," she said, snapping photos of the foundation work. "He's really excited." "Tell him his school is going to last forever," I said. That evening, I drove home through neighborhoods where I'd built houses, stores, and office buildings over the past 23 years. Structures that stood solid because they'd been built right the first time. My phone buzzed with a text from Kevin, who'd found work with a reputable construction firm in Austin. "Saw the news about the school opening ceremony next month. Proud to have worked with you, Ray." I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment, looking at the house Patricia and I had built together. Good foundation, solid walls. A place where truth had been worth more than convenience. Sometimes doing the right thing costs everything. Sometimes it gives you everything back.